following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Bock score from Nedick's at the Old Garden on 51st Street. Every week it goes up a block. And I want to know, what's the score? How Bock?
The score this week is a discussion of Chief Wahoo, who was the Cleveland Indians mascot logo. And finally, after a long time, the Indians have decided to retire the Chief after this season. He will no longer appear on their uniforms. And I think it's a good thing. I think that it's not right to ridicule anybody. And the Chief, even though he's kind of a benign character, he looks like he's got a goofy smile on his face. And I don't think it's right to hold Indians up to ridicule or anybody else up to ridicule. So that's what I wrote about this week, and I think that it's something that needs to be discussed, something that needs to be rectified. And as I wrote in my column, the next ones who have to face this, I think, will be the Washington Redskins. There's been some talk about that in the National Football League, and maybe down the road they'll be forced to change their name even. So that's what I did this week.
I just wonder why those two teams do it so reluctantly. I mean, Native Americans have been protesting this for a very, very long time. Both teams, and will it be the Braves, the Atlanta Braves, with the Wahoo? What will be next? What is and what isn't politically correct can be very, very subjective. Do you agree?
Well, Stanford University out in California, where you live, Stanford was the Indians many, many years. And in the 70s, they came to the realization that that was not appropriate and became the Stanford Cardinal. And their mascot, if you want to call it that, it's not even official. They have one of the orchestra members dressed as a tree, and they call it the Stanford Tree. Now, another university, quite the opposite. We had Joe Pankowski on here a few months ago, and he's from Florida State University. Florida State are the Seminoles, and they have a ritual that I can't believe. They've got a student dressed as an Indian warrior with war paint and the whole 9 yards, and he comes charging out onto the field atop a horse, and he throws a flaming arrow into the turf. I don't know. Is it an arrow? Maybe it's
spear.
Maybe it's a torch.
I think it's a spear.
Yeah, it's a spear. I think you're right.
Yeah.
It's a spear. He throws it into the turf, almost as a declaration of war. Now, on the other team, obviously. Now, I mean, is that really necessary? But that's what they do. So the elimination of Chief Wahoo could be the first step in a list of rectifying these oversights, what I consider to be oversights.
Hey, Hal, let me ask you something. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just curious as to your thought. A school up your way, St. John's, they made a major change. They used to be called the Redmen, and I believe they're now called the Red Storm. Now,
that's right.
Was that change predicated by, either the school, or was there a lot of protest involved, or what caused that?
No, the school took it upon themselves to make that change, and it did not sit well with many of the alumni. I know a lot of St. John's grads who have refused to embrace Red Storm and insist on calling their team the Redmen.
Right.
A lot of this has to do with history. If you were a kid growing up and your team was the Indians, and it had Chief Wahoo as its logo, which has been the case since 1947, you would be probably very reluctant to let go of it. The same thing goes for the Braves, for example. Now, the Braves used an Indian figure as their mascot, not their mascot, but their logo for some time. They've established now a tomahawk under the name Braves. That's their logo. But they also had Chief Nakahoma, who would come out of a little hut in the scoreboard every time there was a home run hit, and he would do a war dance. Well, they've done away with that, thank goodness. But is that really necessary? But fans love that stuff, and it's tough to let go, I guess, I suppose.
I'm just wondering if there's a way to sort of allow some of these teams, like, for example, Florida State, the Seminoles. That's the native tribe of Florida. They were all over the state. Is there a way, perhaps, that the tribe can be honored without all of this nonsense?
They signed off on Florida State using that image, the Seminole tribes of Florida. Now, whether they got a lot of money for it or what, I don't know, but they did sign off on it. They've gotten the approval of the tribe. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. As far as the Braves and the tomahawk, they have adopted the tomahawk chop, which is designed to upset opposing pitchers and stuff. And again, it's lame in my opinion.
Now, Hal, let me ask you this: what do you think about in other words, is there a line that you can draw between a team name and a logo? I'm thinking about the Washington Redskins. That's been an established name for so many years now.
Since the 30s.
Right now
they started in Boston.
Yeah, there are teams.
They were the Boston Redskins, and they moved to Washington.
Right.
Boston Redskins is an offshoot of the Braves. And when they moved from Boston to Washington for the 1937 season, they kept the nickname.
Right.
Okay. Now they're using. I think the Redskins have on their helmet. Don't they have like a feather or something now?
They used to. They haven't had that for a while.
They used to have an R in a circle with feathers. Now they don't.
They used to have a feather going up the center of the helmet too.
Yeah.
They don't have that anymore either. That's gone. And of course, the band, the Redskin marching band, no longer appears with them all dressed in Indian garb.
Now, didn't they have a song, "Hail to the Redskins"?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a racist song too.
Right.
That was a racist song. It was. They changed the words to Old D.C., meaning Washington D.C., from Old Dixie. And it was a very racist song.
The worst one I ever heard. Excuse me. The worst one I ever heard was Yeshiva University, and it was "Oy vey, I have heartburn," and I thought that.
Well, George Preston Marshall, who owned the Redskins, for quite a while, they were the last team in the NFL to integrate.
Yeah, well, he was a racist. He was a racist.
Yeah.
His will set up a trust fund for children, underprivileged children in Washington, but the proviso was that it would not go to black children. It was only for white children.
If you want an example of racism in sports,
absolutely incredible.
Each year at the Kentucky Derby, they play, which amounts to an anthem for the state of Kentucky, "My Old Kentucky Home."
Right.
The words to "My Old Kentucky Home" were racist. Now they've changed some of the words so it would be less offensive, but the original writing of that song by Stephen Foster, the words were racist, and at least there was some recognition of that in the state of Kentucky, that might not go over very well at a national event like the Derby. But, unfortunately, it's throughout sports, and you can find it in a lot of different venues, a lot of different teams. Now, what the Indians are doing, it's interesting. They've agreed to retire Chief Wahoo, the little cartoon character. But he won't be on any uniform. He won't be on the uniform cap. He won't be on the sleeves or any of that stuff. But if you want to buy a Chief Wahoo doll or a Chief Wahoo emblem, you can buy that in the gift shop at the stadium. So they're retaining the rights to sell the good chief to the local citizenry.
Yeah, I was going to say, Hal, I think they probably, I know a lot of the teams do, they've got these bobbleheads, and I think the Cleveland Indians bobblehead is Chief Wahoo.
Yes, that's true.
And you know, again, we talked a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it's marketing, it's money. I mean, you know, the club can change that logo or remove the logo, but if they're still selling the merchandise, they still have that income stream coming in.
Yeah, the first baseball card set to use logos was the 1952 Top set. I remember when I was buying them when I was a kid. Unfortunately, I don't have any of those around anymore. I have the reprints, but that was the first time I was made aware of the Chief Wahoo logo, because that's what they used for the Indians, for the then Boston Braves, which carried on first several years in Milwaukee, was almost like a coin, where the Indian had a headdress on.
That looked like a proud gentleman.
Yeah. Yeah, but
it was a side view. It was a side view of a
silly look on his face.
Yeah,
with a big headdress on. Yeah,
like the Indian on the Indian had pennies that they used 100 years ago.
Yeah, the chief was introduced to Cleveland.
That's a great. Always was a great uniform. And hey, who's going to defend the birds? They have to sit on a bat all day in St. Louis.
Well, they tried doing away with that for 1 year, and it was a disaster. That was when the great Frank Lane was general manager in 1957. They took the birds off the bat, and there was such an outcry that Frank Lane left after he was he tried to trade Musial for Robin Roberts, and he left after 1957, and they brought the birds on the bat back for good.
Hey, you're a UNIVAC, Al Blumpkin. We have I neglected to introduce the cast of characters. George Case III is with us. David Hubler is with us. And again, Al Blumpkin. The master of ceremonies is Hal Bock from the Associated Press. And,
one other thing I wanted to point out, a little history here. Chief Wahoo was introduced to the Indians by the great Bill Veeck, who in 1947. Now, Bill Veeck did not have a racist bone in his body. You have to remember, Bill Veeck integrated the American League with Larry Doby. He also brought Satchel Paige back, out of the Negro Leagues and one of the great pitchers of our time. So,
and had tried years before to integrate. He wanted to bring.
Yeah, he tried to bring a whole team during the war. He tried to bring a whole team out of the Negro Leagues into Major League Baseball. So he didn't have a racist bone in his body. His whole idea, and George mentioned this a little while ago, his whole idea was marketing, and he knew he could market a cartoon character. He might have come up with Donald Duck for all we know, but it worked. It worked. People loved that character in the city of Cleveland, and if you go there, you'll see him all over the place. The chief is all over the place.
I think, don't they still have, Hal, I haven't been to an Indians game in a long, long time, but they used to have a teepee, I think, out in center field or something, and somebody would play a drum and all that kind of stuff at Cleveland Stadium. I don't know whether they still do it at the new ballpark, but I think that used to be a tradition.
I believe the drum still exists. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, the last time I was there was about 2 years ago. At the new ballpark, and yes, he sits out there in the outfield and bangs that drum.
Right. Okay.
Whether it's the original drummer, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I just remember a long time ago that they had that. Like I say, I haven't been there in a long time. But the one thing I also wanted to mention.
For football games. Hey, David, is that also done for football games for the Browns?
I was at one preseason game. It was about the same time 2 years ago. It was a weekend, and I don't think they do. No.
There's nothing to.
They had the dog pound. They still have the dog.
Yeah, the dog pound is what they do, right? They throw bones or something, don't they?
Yeah, but There's nothing for them to do this past season.
Of course, with their wonderful year, they got a hell of a dog.
One of the things I wanted to mention, because you mentioned Hal, you mentioned the Redskins, Washington. Part of the problem with the Washington Redskins has been that there have been Native American tribes that say, we don't find anything wrong with it. So there's this gap. I mean, what's his name, the owner?
Dan Snyder.
Dan Snyder, yeah. He was under tremendous pressure to make a change. But then all of a sudden, some of the Native American tribes, whether they were bought off or what, I don't know, came back and said, "Well, no, it doesn't bother us at all." So he couldn't get. There was not much more of nowhere near a unanimous opinion among Native Americans that this was offensive to them, and so he's managed to stick to his guns and keep the name Redskins.
You know what, David, you mentioned that. I'm curious, and Hal and Alan. You know, the name Redskins or Braves or whatever, I mean, we're thinking about it in terms of pro teams, but you know, as you pointed out, Hal, with the Florida State Seminoles, there's a myriad of college teams that use the word Braves or Indians or Aztecs. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. Now, whether or not that's going to carry over into the college ranks, but my only fear is that if you open the door and say, okay, we're going to change the Washington Redskins, where does it end? Then do you take it down and say, okay, the Boston Braves the Atlanta Braves can't be called the Braves anymore. The Bradley College Braves can't be called. I mean, where does it stop?
The Boston Braves did go off of it for a few years in the late 30s. They were called the Bees.
Right.
And that didn't, last. It obviously didn't go over very well.
Well, you know, in the college ranks,
is that why they went off of it? Were they feeling pressure at that time?
I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. I really don't know. I really can't answer that.
Okay.
All I know is that for about a 5-year period in the late 30s, early 40s, they were known as the Bees.
Yeah, they were known as the Bean Pots too earlier than that, way back.
Well, the Beanie, when the team in the 1890s, when they were exclusive in Boston, they were referred to as the Bean Eaters all the time.
The Bean Eaters
back then,
right.
Yeah, that's right.
It's tough
you mentioned
it's very tough to change a nickname because people grow up with affiliations and they're not. I don't think that they would be very happy to discard the name of their team and adjust to another name. Now, the mascot, Chief Wahoo, well, okay, we get rid of the logo. They have that block C now, which is kind of a handsome rendering of this letter C on their uniforms now. But you know, it's just it's a logo. It's not the name of the team. That's a little bit different to give up the name of the team.
Yeah, well, you know what, Hal, I agree with you, and that's why I'm asking you, because, you know, when I brought up earlier about talking about St. John's, I mean, there's an example of a college team for so many years. I mean, they were called the St. John's Redmen. That's what they were called. And then either through pressure or whatever it is, as you talked about, it was changed to the Red Storm, and a lot of the alumni don't like that at all. Now,
absolutely not.
These colleges have a lot of very wealthy alumni that they really depend upon to support. And all of a sudden, if alumni are going to be up in arms and say, "Hey, I'm not going to support the school anymore. I grew up with the name Redmond, and now all of a sudden they're the Red Storm. I'm just going to stop donating money." And the same thing could be talked about with whether it be Florida State or whether it be talking about Bradley University or any of these other schools. I think it's a potential problem. I agree with the logo situation, but I think if you carry it to another degree, you get into the team names, and that opens up a real can of worms.
Well, I'll tell you the two words.
I have a story for you guys that you'll enjoy, and David particularly will enjoy it because it's an NYU story. I got to NYU in 1956, and the nickname of the NYU teams was the Violets.
Right.
NYU Violets. And we all decided, we were all 18 years old, and we were tough as nails, and we're not going to be Violets. we're going to be something really tough. So we had, I don't even know, I'm not sure if our newspaper, Square Journal, had a contest or we just decided this among ourselves. But we decided that we would now call this team of ours the Violet Vikings.
Yes, right.
Vikings. Do you know that, David? Are you aware of that?
I was aware of it, and I'll tell you how I remember. There was a televised basketball game on. I don't think it was from the Garden. I don't remember where it was, but it was NYU playing someone else. And the mascot was the Violet Viking, who came out in a Viking costume, and mostly in a violet color. So that was the first time I said, where did this come from? It didn't last very long.
That adventure lasted 1 year. That adventure lasted 1 year, and we immediately discarded that because it wasn't terribly popular, and we became the Violets again, and they remain to this day as the Violets. That's not a really vicious kind of a nickname.
No.
Like Redmen or
in a way, it's kind of a sissy
They
name.
have asked you guys this.
It is a kind of a sissy nickname.
Was he a good guy, a communicative guy, good coach?
Yeah, I mean, I had good relations with Lou Rossini. He was easier to get along with than Howard Kahn, who was the predecessor and a legendary coach who had been there for 100 years. And he was a little tough to get along with. But Rossini was was a younger man, and he was an understanding guy. He cooperated with us at we were student writers, and it was not like the mainstream press, but he was good to us.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
He took the team to the Final Four 1 year, so
they produced some wonderful teams. I mean, we were talking a couple of weeks ago. Sat Sanders and Cal Ramsey, some of the great players that they had at NYU, and then they de-emphasized the sport, went down to the division. Well, I think they discontinued it for a long time, and then they brought it back at the Division III level.
That's correct. They dropped it, then they came back. And today they are still at Division III, even though I don't know if it's the largest, but it's one of the largest universities in the country, and they're playing Division III.
I would think it would be.
Because of the involvement of a couple of players in the 1961 basketball.
The thing about that was, I just wonder why you can't even find the scores in the agate type in the sports post section. They have all like city colleges in there and all these Division III teams, and I don't know. I guess NYU has just decided that their sports publicity people won't even promote the scores. I think it's rare that you see a score and it might be put in there by the opposing team. I don't know.
Yeah, there were 350.
They have a site on the internet that they may be putting all this information out on.
Yeah,
there are 351 Division I teams in college basketball. And there's a site that I go to that ranks them all. In fact, my alma mater is in the lower 200s right now.
And that alma mater is
Pittsburgh. They're having a really, really awful year.
Syracuse beat them recently, didn't they?
Everybody beats them.
Right. Well,
Syracuse isn't doing very well this year.
No, Pitt's just Pitt's unwatchable.
I've never seen anything like this. The Syracuse team is all freshmen, and apparently they had like 13 players off the varsity team last year who either graduated or left. And so he's got an entirely freshman team, virtually a freshman team, with the exception of his backcourt. The two guards are guys who were there last year, and they're the big scorers on the team. But he's doing remarkably well with a team that's, I think they're now 16-7.
Yeah, well, I predicted on the Pitt basketball site and Facebook when the ACC tournaments, the ACC schedule started at the end of December, that they would not win a conference game, and so far I'm right. Not only haven't they won one, they haven't been in one.
Here's another example. Syracuse is another example of nicknames being changed. They were the Orange Men for 100 years. Orange Men.
Right.
Now they're the Syracuse Orange.
Right.
No more Orange Men, just Orange.
That's
now, Hal, I was going to mention Syracuse. Now, I'm curious. I remember them being the Orangemen. Why did that name change to Orange?
George,
There were women.
Men was sexist. They would
right.
Well, I mean, was that what it was? Was sexist? I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, my alma mater, Rutgers, used to have their alma mater was on the banks of the old Raritan, and they talked about my father sent me to old Rutgers. Well, now they've changed that because it's got to be my parents sent me to old Rutgers and resolved that I should be a man, and now they say and resolved that I should be a person.
Oh, isn't that awful? I think that's just
So a lot of the alumni are very upset because here they are, they're changing the words to the college alma mater, which had existed for 150 years.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. You know, I mean, there's something to be said for tradition and for history.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, when I worked at the Transit Authority, and they had to change all the titles, like trainman became train operator, all sorts of stuff like that.
Well, stewardesses are no longer stewardesses; they're flight attendants.
They're flight attendants.
Flight attendants, yeah.
And I don't like the term chair. If it's a man, say chairman. If it's a woman, say chairwoman. Don't give me this chair. That's a piece of furniture. I don't go for that.
We live in the age of political correctness.
Oh, I know. That's terrible.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why I'm curious about, again, changing the names. I mean, I understand the logos, but it still bothers me personally if you're going to take an institution and you're going to, force that institution to change their name, whether it be the Chippewas or whether it be the Aztecs or whether it be the Braves or whatever it is. I mean, that's the name that school that put their reputation on for years and years and years.
Yeah, well, George, I'll give you an example. Let me give you an example in the college ranks.
Cleveland something else, and the Washington something else. Down the road, it may take 5 years, 10 years. Is that an inevitability?
Perhaps.
There's another example. There's an example in baseball. The Cincinnati Reds became the Cincinnati Redlegs for a while because of the communists.
Communists, right.
Right.
Yeah, for about 5 years.
I guess it was in the 50s.
Yeah,
right.
I think
it was all during the McCarthy
era.
Yeah,
7 or 8. Yeah.
Right. The NCAA though did institute a rule. My son was at Elon College when it was still Elon College before it became Elon University. And at that time, the nickname and the mascot was the Fighting Christians, although the school was non-denominational for the most part. When they moved into Division II, I think is where they are, as a university, they were forced to change that name to now that it's Elon Phoenix. So, and I think that, if I recall correctly, my son filled me in on it, but I forgot a bit of it, was that the fact that they could not have any kind of religious connotation. Now, I always point out, well, the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, it's considered the same thing, but somehow either they were grandfathered in, or I would think that would probably be the last name you would change in a major sports program. The Fighting Irish,
And the logo.
Yeah, I remember watching a basketball game.
Little leprechaun.
The
leprechaun.
Notre Dame basketball game. I may have been at the Garden or someplace, and they say, "Here come the Fighting Irish," and 5 black guys ran out onto the court.
Yeah, well, that's what's happened. But the name, I don't think they'll ever change that name. I mean, it would take not only an act of Congress, but a papal encyclical. Change it.
Well, they're a national school, a national team.
Right.
They're like the Yankees and the Cubs in baseball. It's a national image that they have. So they'll never change that. That'll never happen.
Well, it's funny, when we moved to England and we became friendly with some of our neighbors, one of them one day sort of sidled up and said, let me ask you a question. Does the term Yankees bother you? Are you insulted by that? Because he was trying to be, politically correct. And I said, hell no. I've been a Yankees fan all my life. He didn't know what I was talking about. But, I mean, that they thought of the term Yankees as being derogatory. Now, in the South, Yankees is derogatory for the most part, not referring to the ball team. But you go into places in the South and they'll talk about the damn Yankees, not referring to the play or the movie, talking about the Northerners.
Yankee go home.
Yeah, well, Yankee go home, sure. So it depends on the perception.
Yeah, and I think the British during World War II, they were not real happy. They used to say, you know, they were fighting the war and all the Yanks were getting all the girls over in London. So,
right.
You know.
Were the Americans happy with the Limeys?
They're overpaid, oversexed, and they're over here.
Right.
Yeah. I think there was a movie made called Yanks a bunch of years ago. Yeah. About the Americans over in Britain during that period.
There were many movies about. Yeah.
Well, that's my whole problem that I have with all the name changes and everything else. I mean, with politically correct, I mean, you know, if they're going to do it, but my Lord, if you take a team like the Washington Redskins or the Atlanta Braves, you know, what do? What do they become? I mean, you know, you're talking about all this history. And the history of, like David, you're talking about Yankees. I mean, the history of this country is the Civil War. You know, the Yankees against the blue against the green.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. That's part of our history. Yeah. So now they're talking about, you know, they don't want to have any more statues. So they want to tear down statues of Robert E. Lee. Well, then what happens? Do you tear down the Washington Monument? Do you tear down the Jefferson Memorial? Do you tear down the Lincoln? You know, where does it end? I mean, that's my problem with
all this stuff. But Robert E. Lee went to war against this country. He was the enemy, you know.
He was the enemy. You're right.
That was treason. That was treason, Mr. Trump. That was real treason.
He was a West Point graduate.
Treason, David, right? That was treason.
What? That was treason. That was the definition of treason.
That was treason.
Yes, as cited in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
You know how the Boston Braves got the Brave nickname? It was in the first decade of the 20th century. And they had their own version of Tammany Hall. Tammany is an Indian name.
Right.
And they called people who worked for Tammany Hall as Braves. And that's how they got that nickname, because the owners at the time were Tammany men.
Yeah, well, that was New York. Tammany Hall.
No, that was also in Boston. That was also in Boston. And the Boston Braves, for quite a while, basically operated as the way the Kansas City did with the Yankees in the 50s, the Boston Braves did with the Giants for the first decade of the 20th century.
Here's another example. When the Braves left Milwaukee and moved to Atlanta, Milwaukee got a new team. It was the Seattle Pilots.
Yeah.
But they didn't name them. They didn't call them the Pilots. They called them the Milwaukee Brewers.
Right.
So they completely changed the name. They discarded one name and adopted another one because.
And the minor league team in Atlanta was
a lot of beer.
The minor league team in Atlanta was known as the Atlanta Crackers.
Right.
They played in the old Southern Association, and in the International League for a couple of years before the Braves moved down there. The Crackers. I mean, when I was in basic training in the Army. That's how I refer to these uneducated Southerners who.
Yeah, that was a derogatory.
I was going to say that's a derogatory term for a Southerner, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely,
yes.
As well as being a redundancy.
Well, we could, you know, if you want to take it a step further, if you really wanted to go the opposite direction, you could change, you know, Cincinnati Rednecks or the Redskins to the Rednecks or any combination thereof. If you wanted to bring in a derogatory term and make it really derogatory.
So it does become political correctness. I mean, just a society's problem in every way. Rewording rule books at companies.
Oh, yeah.
Hiring people to make sure that there's no violation of it. And
yeah.
It's a job in itself.
Well, you know, there was, when the Redskins name was really in the news and people were suggesting all sorts of different things, one of the names that was promoted, which would sort of satisfy both sides, people thought, was the Washington Redskin potatoes. because there is a redskin potato. Okay?
Oh my God.
And you wouldn't have to change anything. And
I had heard that one, David. That's a classic.
Yeah.
That is very,
That's
very
good, yeah.
clever. That's great. A potato with a headdress on it.
Yeah, nobody's offended by a potato.
Or a headdress.
19th century Indians were known as the spiders.
Right.
Yes, right.
And then they went through the Naps, which is after Nap with Joey and a couple of others before they wound up, because the myth is, I don't know how true this is, but they named the team the Indians after an Indian player that they had in the late 90s who had tremendous promise but drank himself out of the majors, Louis Sockalexis.
Right, from Maine, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
He was a
and Alan, as you know, the Spiders were absolutely a horrible team. So
they were good. What happened there was that the Robeson brothers owned both St. Louis and Cleveland, and Cleveland was pretty good up until 1898, where St. Louis was terrible, and basically Cleveland would not allow Sunday ball or sale of beer in the ballpark. So what they did was they shifted almost everybody who was any good from Cleveland to St. Louis and shipped all the dregs from St. Louis, who were there in 1897, 1898 to Cleveland, and that 1899 team won 20 games.
Right.
Lost 43 out of 44 and played most of the last half of the season on the road. Then, of course, when they cut back to 8 teams, they would drop. But there was a lot of syndicate baseball going on in the 1890s where owners had control of two teams.
Right.
There was a lot of that back then. But that's how if Cleveland would allow beer in the Sunday ball, they might have, that horrendous Spider team might not have happened.
Right.
Oh, Richmond University are the Spiders.
Yeah.
Right.
The Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers, were the Brooklyn Robins, after Robinson.
Right.
Robinson, yeah.
Manager. Mm-hmm.
Manager.
Yeah. Weren't they the Trolley Chasers or
Yeah,
something?
the Trolley Dodgers, and then
Trolley
Dodgers, and then they shortened it to Dodgers. Right.
They were the Superbers.
Yes, they were.
The manager was Ned Hanlon, and there was some vaudeville act called Hanlon Superbers. So they were called the Superbers for a while. There's a whole load of stuff that went on back in those days.
Yeah, well, the Trolley, because Ebbets Field was right where all the Trolleys came together.
The Yankees were the Highlanders. They started off.
The
Highlanders.
But the Trolley Dodgers. It was the fans had to dodge across the trolley tracks to get over to the ballpark.
Right.
And that's where the nickname came from.
Yeah, the Yankees were the Highlanders for the first.
Because it was up in the
4 or 5 years of their existence. Yeah.
The
Mets
Dodgers,
with the Mutts.
in headlines in the 50s here in New York, were often called the Flock.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody know the derivation of that?
That was the Robins.
Called the Flock.
From Robins.
The flock of Robins.
That you were
David is right.
Going back to the Robins. That's right. That's right.
Wow.
But people of my generation never knew them as the Robins.
No,
we knew them as the Dodgers.
No, and one other one, you guys remember the Phillies? They were called the Blue Jays.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yep. That's right.
That doesn't help.
Here's something startling.
Changed.
Yeah.
The old timers in our day when we were growing up as kids, the Ty Cobb era was maybe 30 years before we were growing up. The days we were growing up was twice that amount. So we got nostalgia going heavy time.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Ralph. Right. Yeah, it's twice as long from our childhood to now as it was from our childhood back to the days of Ty Cobb.
Of our right, exactly.
Yeah, I know.
Stories about hit 'em where they ain't, we will the killer.
Right.
And not only do we remember that, but we remember the 60 years that has preceded that, or some odd years.
We weren't that far away from Babe Ruth.
That's right.
At that point, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just want to say,
we're about as far away now from Mickey Mantle as we would have been as children from Babe Ruth.
The Orioles have been in Baltimore longer than the Browns were in St. Louis.
Right.
That
more successful too.
No, obviously.
Of our Giants being in San Francisco so much longer than we knew them as kids in New York.
Well, Dodgers have not, it goes fast. And back, I told some 14-year-old kid at the Sabre convention during the trivia contest, I said, you have it a lot harder than I did because when I was your age, I didn't have that much to remember.
And there wasn't
16 teams.
Remember it all, right?
16 teams, baseball teams, 12 football teams, 6 hockey teams, 8 basketball teams. Now, forget it. Yeah.
Right. I agree with you.
Well, I still say that the Giants and the Dodgers are going to, see the error of their ways one of these years, and they're going to come back east.
Well, some people in Philadelphia suggested
the Mets and the Yankees are signing the papers right now.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Mets, hey, Ralph, you're a Mets fan. What are they calling the stadium this year? I saw a thing in the paper. They signed Todd
Frazier.
Todd Frazier,
yes.
And they talked about a state. I thought it was City Field.
That's what they're going to rename the stadium, Todd Frazier Stadium. And he gave him a discount, home team discount. But that's all he's asking.
No, they didn't say City Field. They referred to a different name. And,
really?
One of these corporations, and I'm wondering whether they've sold the naming rights to City Field, or the City Corp has decided not to pay any more money.
Well, it looks like Ebbets Field. It's got a statue of Jackie out in front of it. Who knows what they're going to name it? Wouldn't it be something if they named it Ebbets Field 2 or something?
Well, the funniest thing was
anything past the Wilpons. I don't put anything past the Wilpons.
I was in Cincinnati the first year that the Great American Ballpark was opened in 2003. I have a friend that lives a couple hours from there, and we visited him. We went to a game down there. And I thought the Great American was a patriotic all the way. Then you look across the way there, that's Great American Insurance Company.
Yeah, there are a lot of,
You can't keep up with this stuff.
Hey. Well, Progressive Field was
the Jake. They still call it the Jake.
Yeah, the Jake. Mm-hmm.
But basically, what happened when I wrote the trivia contest when this nonsense first started, and I asked a corporate name question, and I got such a bad reaction that when I wrote the trivia after that, I never used any of that. Somebody asked me why. I said, because nobody knows or cares about it.
They named their stadium, or they built their stadium recently, 10 years ago, Pac Bell Stadium.
Yeah.
Wow, that rang true. That was beautiful. 2 or 3 years, it's AT&T Park, this or that. That's bullshit.
Money talks, boys.
Yeah, well, they do the naming rights, and if they have a contract and the naming rights are, say, for 3 years or 5 years or whatever, and the contract is due, and they don't renew,
I know it's all about business, but I don't need it thrown up in my face.
Yeah, I suggested that the Transit Authority sell naming rights to their major stations. I was laughed at. Now somebody said that might happen down the road.
There are only a couple of teams in the major leagues that you can put money on that the names of the stadiums will not change.
Yankee
Stadium is one.
Mm-hmm. Fenway Park. Fenway Park.
Wrigley.
The old ballpark. Wrigley Field.
Yeah.
Yep.
We started this conversation talking about logos, and I want to point out there are 2 logos that I think will never change in our lifetime, and I admire them as much as and David, please forgive me, as much as I dislike the Yankees, the New York logo on the Yankee shirt and the Detroit Tigers Old English D.
Yes,
You'll
yes.
never see those change.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I still like that top hat, the Yankee top hat with the bat inside.
Yes,
You don't see that very much anymore, though.
No, but that's adds a little red to the color, and it's very well done.
And non-offensive. It doesn't offend anyone.
Yeah, the Cardinal logo will never change either. I think that's another one, yeah.
Well, that's still Busch Stadium, isn't it there?
Oh, yeah, it's Busch Stadium. Well, Sportsman's Park became Busch Stadium.
Yeah, right.
After,
but I mean,
the Browns
that's one of the teams.
Yeah, this is Busch Stadium 3.
That won't change, yeah.
This is Busch Stadium 3, yeah.
Yeah.
But they have 5 more. It'll be Busch Stadium 8.
That's right. The stadiums have a life today of about 30 years, and then they.
Yeah. I mean, look what's happened in Atlanta.
Somebody once said to me, we were going into the Metrodome, which is no longer there in Minnesota, as we all know, and we were going into the Metrodome, and he said to me, "You know, you're old when you covered the first game in this building, and now they're taking it down." And that's true.
That's absolutely true.
A couple of times.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, I played hooky from high school to go see Shea Stadium opened in 1964, and so I know I'm old. Thank you, Hal, for the reminder. Ladies
so
and
the
gentlemen,
renovated
no one gets out alive.
The renovated Yankee Stadium opened in 1976 and closed in 2008.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
the Yankee Stadium today was not the Yankee Stadium that was refurbished, and absolutely had no connection other than the name to the house that Ruth built. Absolutely
I put down on Facebook a while back, the old stadium was a shrine. This is just a ballpark.
Right, I agree.
My cousin refers to it as a ballpark surrounded by a food court.
That's about it.
I mean, if you've been in that monstrous lobby, I mean, it's like this, you're walking into Grand Central Station.
Were you
I'll tell you, let me tell you a quick story.
Yankee Stadium, by the rebuilt Yankee Stadium? Did that bother anybody?
No. It did me, but I get over it. But
now,
George,
I went to the Yankee Stadium. I went to the new Yankee Stadium about 2 years ago, and I was in the whatever they call it, the museum or something there, and they had a tour guide, and the tour guide is going around, and I'm saying, let me ask you something. Can you tell me who these players are? I knew who they were. They had a big blow up of Lou Gehrig in his Luckiest Man speech. And the guy looked at me and said, "No, I really don't know." And I said, "Well, let me tell you who they are. Maybe you can explain to anybody coming in here who these gentlemen are." And I had to point out, Bill Dickey and Babe Ruth and all these great Yankee players over the years. And here's the Yankee Stadium tour guide, because he's a young kid, probably in his 20s, had absolutely no idea who that was.
That's disgraceful. They should never have hired him, or they should have trained him.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a similar story.
My cousin who took me said to me, he said, "Why don't you become a tour guide?" I said, because I'm an old guy, but at least I could tell who the players are.
And it's a long commute for you, George.
There was one time there that they were giving some sort of quiz, and they put up 4 possible answers, one of which was Allie Reynolds, and the 4 pictures below it, the answers, possible answers, what was supposed to be Allie Reynolds was Vic Raschi. So I turned to this friend of mine. I said, "That's not Reynolds, that's Vic Raschi." He says to me, "You're probably the only one in the whole damn place that knows that."
Right. That's probably true, Alan.
Speaking of getting back to the Indian logo, that's a good segue back.
What was Allie Reynolds' nickname?
The Chief.
What was Allie Reynolds'
Chief?
Super Chief. But Super Chief, yeah.
So it was Indian heritage.
Well, they called all the Indian players around the turn of the century. Chief Bender, Chief Myers, they were all chiefs.
They were.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Time to plug a poignant book. Bill Cashadas wrote a book on Chief Bender, and Bill Cashadas has a podcast show, Billy from Philly, on this network, Philadelphia Sports, Past, Present, and Future. And he and I are going to sit down really soon and talk about that book. I'm inviting any or all of you to join us on that, or let's invite him as a guest on this show. Would that be okay with you guys?
Fine.
Yeah, sure.
It's fine with me.
Beautiful.
Why not?
We can have him as a segment, not to interrupt, talking about Hal's columns on a weekly basis. It's been terrific. Your columns have evoked an awful lot of great talk between us. And thank you, Hal. Thank you, George Case III. Thank you, David Hubler. Thank you, Al Blumkin. And we will be back before you know it. Adios, everybody.
Yep. Bye-bye, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.